From the moment we are aware of the world around us, we start receiving messages, spoken and unspoken, about what makes a person valuable. We learn very early that praise follows achievement, that approval often comes after performance, and that love can feel conditional on how well we meet expectations. Slowly, almost invisibly, we absorb a dangerous belief our worth must be earned. So we learn to measure ourselves. We compare our success to others, our productivity to an invisible standard, our appearance, our intelligence, our resilience. We tell ourselves, I'll feel good about myself when I reach that goal, when I fix that flaw, when I stop making mistakes, when people finally see my value. Life becomes a constant audition, and we live as if we are always one failure away from being exposed as not enough. This belief is exhausting. It turns life into a race with no finish line. The truth that disrupts this cycle is simple, but deeply uncomfortable. Worthiness is not something you achieve. It is something you accept. People who live with confidence, connection, and purpose are not people who have eliminated their flaws. They are people who have stopped using their flaws as evidence against their value. They begin from the belief that they are enough, not because they are exceptional, but because they are human. This shift matters because what you believe about your worth determines how you show up everywhere else. If you believe your value is conditional, you will constantly seek validation. You will say yes when you mean no. You will hide parts of yourself to fit in. You will overwork, overgive, and overextend, hoping that eventually the effort will pay off in belonging. But when you believe you are already enough, your behavior changes. You stop chasing approval and start choosing alignment. You begin to ask different questions, not how do I impress, but how do I stay true to myself, not what will make me accepted, but what actually matters to me. This doesn't mean you stop growing or striving. It means your growth comes from self-respect rather than self-rejection. You improve not because you are broken, but because you are alive and learning. One of the biggest misunderstandings about self-worth is the idea that believing you are enough will make you complacent. In reality, the opposite is true. When your worth is not on the line, you are more willing to take risks. You can fail without collapsing. You can receive feedback without feeling attacked. You can try again without questioning your value as a person. Think about how children learn before they are taught to doubt themselves. They fall, they try again, they ask questions freely. They don't interpret mistakes as proof that they are unworthy. They interpret them as part of learning. Somewhere along the way, many of us unlearn that freedom. Believing you are enough is not arrogance, it is not denial. It is not pretending you have no weaknesses. It is the quiet confidence that says, I can acknowledge my flaws without letting them define me. And this belief does not come from positive affirmations alone. It comes from practice. It comes from noticing the moments when you tie your worth to outcomes and gently questioning that habit. It comes from recognizing how often you speak to yourself in ways you would never speak to someone you love. It comes from choosing self-compassion in moments where self-criticism feels automatic. Living from worthiness also changes how you relate to others. When you don't need to prove yourself, you don't need to compete. When you don't feel threatened, you can be generous. When you don't fear being less than, you can celebrate others without diminishing yourself. This is not a one-time realization. It is a daily decision to step out of scarcity and into enoughness. A decision to believe that your presence has value even on the days when nothing impressive happens. A decision to trust that you don't have to earn the right to take up space. If believing you are already enough is the foundation, vulnerability is the practice that brings that belief to life. And yet, vulnerability is one of the most misunderstood experiences we have. For many people, the word itself triggers discomfort. We associate vulnerability with exposure, with risk, with the possibility of rejection. We imagine it as weakness, as something to avoid, something that leaves us unprotected. From an early age, we are taught to armor up. Don't cry in public. Don't show fear. Don't admit uncertainty. Don't let people see how much you care. Strength, we are told, means control. Strength means having answers. Strength means never letting them see you struggle. But this version of strength comes at a cost. When we suppress vulnerability, we don't just numb pain, we numb joy, creativity, connection, and love. We become efficient, composed, and emotionally distant, convincing ourselves that we are safe when, in reality, we are disconnected. Vulnerability is not about weakness. Vulnerability is about showing up when you cannot control the outcome. It is speaking even when your voice shakes. It is admitting you don't know. It is asking for help before you are desperate. It is loving someone without guarantees. It is leading without certainty. Every meaningful experience in your life required vulnerability. You did not fall in love because you were sure it wouldn't hurt. You didn't start something new because you were guaranteed success. You didn't speak your truth because you knew you would be applauded. You did those things because something mattered more than your fear. Courage is not the absence of vulnerability. Courage exists because of vulnerability. Yet many of us spend our lives waiting to feel brave before we act. We tell ourselves, once I'm more confident, then I'll try. Once I'm less afraid, then I'll speak. Once I'm sure, then I'll begin. But confidence is not the prerequisite for courage. Confidence is often the result of showing up after fear. When we avoid vulnerability, we build emotional armor. And while armor may protect us from being hurt, it also prevents us from being seen. It creates distance in relationships, rigidity in leadership, and stagnation in growth. Armor keeps us from feedback, intimacy, and authenticity. The paradox is this: the more you armor up to protect yourself from pain, the more alone you feel. And the lonelier you feel, the more dangerous vulnerability seems. Vulnerability requires boundaries. It is not about oversharing or exposing yourself to unsafe people. It is about discernment, choosing to be open in spaces where trust is possible. It is about honesty with yourself before honesty with others. It is about allowing your real experience to exist instead of performing an edited version of yourself. In leadership, vulnerability looks like admitting uncertainty instead of pretending to know everything. In relationships, it looks like expressing needs instead of expecting mind reading. In personal growth, it looks like trying again after failure instead of hiding behind perfectionism. One of the most powerful shifts happens when you stop asking, "What if I fail?" and start asking, "What if I don't try?" Avoiding vulnerability may reduce short-term discomfort, but it also guarantees long-term regret. The risks of being seen are real, but so are the costs of staying hidden. Vulnerability also deepens connection. People don't connect with perfection, they connect with honesty. When someone shares their fear, uncertainty, or struggle, it creates permission for others to do the same. Vulnerability is contagious. It creates trust not through control, but through authenticity. Choosing vulnerability does not mean you will never be hurt. It means you are willing to live fully rather than safely. It means accepting that uncertainty is not a flaw in the system. It is the price of a meaningful life. It means understanding that emotional exposure is not a liability, but the doorway to courage, creativity, and real belonging. And once you begin to see vulnerability not as a threat, but as a strength, the way you show up in the world starts to shift. To understand why vulnerability feels so difficult, we have to talk about the emotion that works hardest to keep us hidden: shame. Shame is subtle, powerful, and deeply personal. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It tells us stories about who we are and why we don't belong. And most of the time, we don't even realize how much influence it has over our lives. Shame is not the same as guilt, though we often confuse the two. Guilt says, "I did something wrong." Shame says, "There is something wrong with me." Guilt focuses on behavior, shame attacks identity. And when shame takes hold, it doesn't motivate growth, it paralyzes it. Shame convinces us that if people really knew us, our mistakes, our fears, our doubts, they would turn away. So we hide, we stay silent. We curate versions of ourselves that feel safer, more acceptable, more polished. We tell ourselves that once we fix this part or overcome that struggle, then we will be worthy of connection. But shame does not disappear when it is ignored. It grows stronger in the dark. Shame thrives on three things: secrecy, silence, and judgment. As long as an experience remains unspoken, it has the power to define us. As long as we believe we are alone in our struggle, shame tightens its grip. And as long as we fear being judged, we keep choosing isolation over honesty. This is why vulnerability feels so threatening, because shame tells us that being seen is dangerous. The antidote to shame is not perfection. It is not self-discipline. It is not trying harder. The antidote to shame is empathy. The moment you share your story with someone who responds with understanding instead of judgment, shame begins to unravel. It cannot survive being named and met with compassion. Empathy does not require fixing or advice. It requires presence. It sounds like you're not alone. It sounds like that makes sense. It sounds like I see you. And here's the most difficult part: shame often uses our own voice against us. The harshest judgments usually come from inside. We speak to ourselves in ways we would never speak to another human being. We replay our failures. We exaggerate our flaws. We tell ourselves stories that reinforce the belief that we are not enough. Recognizing shame means learning to identify those stories and question them. Is this a fact, or is this fear speaking? Is this my true self, or is this the voice of self-protection trying to keep me hidden? Shame also shapes how we behave. It keeps us from asking for help because needing support feels like failure. It keeps us from setting boundaries because we fear disappointing others. It keeps us from celebrating our success because we worry about being seen as arrogant. Shame convinces us that staying small is safer than standing out. But staying silent does not protect us. It isolates us. When we allow ourselves to speak about what we've been taught to hide, we reclaim power. When we replace judgment with curiosity, we create space for healing. When we meet our own struggles with compassion instead of criticism, we begin to loosen shame's hold. This does not mean sharing everything with everyone. It means choosing honesty over hiding in the spaces where trust exists. It means acknowledging your humanity instead of punishing yourself for it. It means understanding that shame loses its power the moment it is spoken and received with empathy. And as shame begins to loosen its grip, something else becomes possible: the courage to show up as you are, without the constant fear of being exposed. Perfectionism often looks admirable from the outside. It shows up as high standards, strong work ethic, attention to detail, and a relentless drive to improve. Many people wear it like a badge of honor. They believe perfectionism is the reason they succeed, the force that keeps them disciplined, motivated, and respected. But beneath the surface, perfectionism is not about excellence. It is about fear. Perfectionism is the belief that if you do everything flawlessly, you can avoid shame, blame, judgment, and rejection. It is a strategy for self-protection. And like most fear-based strategies, it promises safety but delivers exhaustion. Excellence is internally motivated. It says, I want to do my best because this matters to me. Perfectionism is externally driven. It says, I must not fail because failure will cost me belonging. The difference is subtle, but the impact is enormous. When perfectionism runs the show, mistakes feel catastrophic. Feedback feels personal. Failure feels like exposure. Instead of learning from experience, you brace yourself against it. You spend more energy trying to look capable than actually growing. Perfectionism also creates paralysis. If the outcome must be flawless, starting becomes terrifying. You wait until you feel ready, confident, certain. You overprepare. You procrastinate. You abandon ideas before they ever see the light of day, not because they aren't good, but because they aren't guaranteed to be perfect. And the cruel irony is this: perfectionism does not prevent failure. It prevents engagement. It keeps you from experimenting, adapting, and evolving. It replaces curiosity with control. Perfectionism also damages relationships. It makes it hard to be honest about struggles because honesty feels like weakness. It raises expectations that no one, including yourself, can consistently meet. It creates resentment, comparison, and a constant sense of falling short. At its core, perfectionism is rooted in the belief that who you are is not enough, so what you do must be flawless. That belief keeps you stuck in a cycle of proving and performing, never resting in the knowledge that your worth is secure. The way out of perfectionism is not lowering your standards. It is separating your self-worth from your performance. It is learning to measure success not only by outcomes, but by effort, integrity, and growth. This shift requires self-compassion. Self-compassion is not self-indulgence or excuses. It is the practice of treating yourself with the same understanding you would offer a friend who is learning something difficult. It is acknowledging that mistakes are part of being human, not evidence of failure as a person. When you replace perfectionism with self-compassion, failure becomes information instead of condemnation. Feedback becomes guidance instead of threat. Trying becomes more important than proving. Letting go of perfectionism also means embracing imperfection publicly. It means allowing yourself to be seen in the process, not just at the finish line. It means risking being judged for being real rather than admired for being untouchable. Imperfection is not a liability. It is what makes learning possible, connection authentic, and growth sustainable. When you stop demanding perfection from yourself, you create space to show up fully, to lead, to create, to contribute without the constant fear of getting it wrong. And in that space, something unexpected happens. You don't become less capable. You become more resilient, more engaged, and more alive. Wholehearted living is not a personality type reserved for the confident or the fearless. It is not a finish line you reach once you have healed enough, learned enough, or fixed enough about yourself. Wholehearted living is a practice, a series of choices you make every day to show up honestly, even when it feels uncomfortable. At its core, wholehearted living means choosing courage over comfort. Comfort says, stay quiet, stay safe, stay small. Courage says, show up, speak honestly, be seen. Comfort promises protection, but it also asks you to sacrifice authenticity. Courage offers no guarantees, but it allows you to live with integrity. One of the most visible expressions of wholehearted living is boundaries. Boundaries are not walls, they are acts of clarity. They are the moments when you say no without over-explaining, when you choose rest without guilt, when you honor your limits instead of betraying yourself for approval. Boundaries require courage because they risk disappointing others. But without them, resentment grows, burnout follows, and connection becomes strained. Wholehearted living also requires self-compassion. Self-compassion is the willingness to meet your own pain without judgment. It is recognizing that struggle is not a personal failure, but a shared human experience. When you practice self-compassion, you stop abandoning yourself in moments of difficulty. You stay present. You listen. You respond with care instead of criticism. Another pillar of wholehearted living is embracing imperfection. This means letting go of the need to control how you are perceived. It means allowing yourself to be unfinished, uncertain, and learning in public. Imperfection invites authenticity. It signals to others that they don't have to pretend either. It creates environments where growth is possible because fear is not in charge. Wholehearted people do not wait for confidence to act. They act, and confidence follows. They understand that fear does not disappear when you are doing meaningful work. It accompanies it. The goal is not to eliminate fear, but to stop letting fear make decisions for you. This way of living also changes how you define success. Success is no longer about appearing flawless or collecting approval. It becomes about alignment, living in a way that reflects your values. You begin to measure your days not by how much you accomplished, but by how honestly you showed up. Not by how well you performed, but by how fully you participated. Wholehearted living asks you to trade certainty for meaning. There are no guarantees that choosing courage will lead to applause, promotion, or acceptance. But there is a guarantee that choosing comfort will keep you disconnected from your own life. The greatest cost is not failure. It is never fully showing up. As you practice this way of living, you begin to trust yourself. You learn that you can survive discomfort. You learn that being seen does not destroy you. You learn that even when things don't go as planned, your worth remains intact. This trust becomes the foundation for resilience, creativity, and genuine connection. And so we return to the one truth that changes everything. You were never meant to earn your worth through perfection, silence, or self-protection. You were meant to live from the truth that you are already enough. When you choose courage over comfort, when you allow yourself to be real instead of perfect, when you show up wholeheartedly, you don't just change how you live, you change how you see yourself. And in that shift, you step into a life that is not smaller or safer, but braver, richer, and deeply your own.